Hey friends, my name is Jake. Welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge University episode number 30. This episode is quite a bit different than most of my episodes in that I didn't plan this really. I just decided less than an hour ago to make this video to talk about this topic. So I don't have, I never have a script per se, but I usually have, notes and stuff. I've thought about the topic for a long time, in preparation for the video. Now, this is a topic I have thought about for a very long time, but I haven't thought about it in the context of making a video for a long time. And it happened because of my review of the Solus, or it was triggered, I should say, by my review of the Solus slip joint knives. I always get comments when I review slip joint knives, maybe not always, but the sentiment, that people don't like slip joint knives. I don't use slip joint knives. Sometimes they say slip joint knives aren't safe. So this video is going to be about slip joint knives. The main topic is going to be how to use a slip joint knife safely, and secondarily, what to use a slip joint knife on. Like what kind of tasks and stuff do you use a slip joint knife for? And I'm going to show you about half of my slip joint knives that I have. I don't have a huge knife collection. Well, for some people's definitions, it might be huge. But for a guy who's been a knife nut and a knife collector for as long as I have, and it's been a very long time, my knife collection really isn't all that big. And that's mostly because even though I've reviewed well over 1,000 knives on this channel, I've had to sell almost all of them just to keep the channel going. I have to buy knives to review, which means I have to sell knives in order to have enough money to buy knives to review, and the cycle just continues. But there are some knives that I've kept, and I'm going to show you some of my slip joint knives. And just before we come down to the tabletop to do this, I did record a video back in 2022 on how slip joint knives function, how they work, the mechanism involved. So I'm not going to talk about the mechanism now. You can watch that video. I'm going to link it right there, right now. But I'm also going to link it at the end of the video, and I'll link it down in the comment section as well. If you want to see the video about how slip joint knives work, both traditional back spring slip joints and detent slip joints, see that video. It's got detailed close-up information on how they actually function. How you use them and what you use them for, that's going to be what this video is about. So come on down to the tabletop and let's take a look at slip joint knives in a bit more detail. Well, I think I've learned my lesson. This is the third time that I'm trying to record this part of the video. I do need to have notes. I can't just do a video like this off the cuff. It's going to end up being gibberish, and I'm going to be recording a lot of it. I recorded 38 minutes the first time. The second time, I didn't record as much time worth, but yeah, it just wasn't organized. So let's do this in an organized fashion. First, slip joint versus friction joint knife. These are slip joint knives. This is a friction folder. Now, the difference between a slip joint knife and a friction folder is there's nothing that stops this blade in any one position except for friction. It's only friction that has anything at play. This kind of friction folder is really awesome with this extended tang, because when the blade's deployed, that tang goes under your hand and it's effectively, pretty much the same as being locked. It can move a little bit, but in terms of safety of your hand, it's a very safe way to use a knife. These are by Svord. It's a company in New Zealand. It's their peasant knife. They make a lot of budget knives like this, and they also make some higher end knives as well. If you haven't heard of this kind of knife before, check them out. They're quite good. They're usually with carbon steel, but they sometimes publish them, or they sometimes put them out with stainless steel as well. This is the standard size, and this is the small size, and they've also got a mini size, like a keychain kind of thing. And I think they made one, but it's not available all that often, like a giant one. A slip joint knife is a knife that, it moves, under friction as well. See, I'm pulling this out, there's friction, but there's either a spring that holds the knife in, a half stop and a full open. And so now, I can make it start to close, but there's a spring holding it there, not just friction, or with a detent in there. Now, if you aren't sure what a detent is, like I said earlier in the intro, go watch the video about how these things actually function, the way they're built. Once you understand the difference between the spring and the detent, then you'll understand it. So a detent or a back spring. That's the two main ways that slip joint knives are made. There could be other ways out there. I'm not familiar with any, but slip joint knives, like this, back spring or detent. The next thing I want to cover, because it's important, is there's three main ways. Well, some people are going to say there's four main ways of cutting with a knife. The three main ways that I talk about are cutting, slicing, and piercing. Now, why is that important? Because with most knives, like a locking folder or a fixed blade, you can do all of those without thinking about the safety issue that you have to think about when you've got a slip joint knife or a non-locking knife. So let me demonstrate. I've got this slip joint knife here. Cutting is when, whatever it is you're cutting, let's assume it's this piece of plastic, you take your blade and you push it into whatever you're cutting. You're not moving the blade forward and back over that item. You're just putting it right in. The best thing to picture is a cake. And when you cut a cake, you put the knife and you slide it straight down. You don't move the knife this way. You don't saw into the cake. You just put it over and cut down. That's cutting. Slicing is moving the edge across it while you're drawing the blade through it. So this is a slicing motion. This is a cutting motion. Now, chopping is the fourth thing that a lot of people consider as a separate thing, but chopping is just cutting quickly and hard. So really it's a form of cutting. It's just doing it quickly and hard. The final way of cutting is piercing. Now, this is a slip joint knife, so I'm not going to pierce into anything, but you know what piercing is? Stabbing. Stabbing is not suggested for any slip joint or any non-locking knife. Other than stabbing, other than piercing, slip joint knives are safe to use in any other kinds of cutting. No matter what the material is, no matter where it is, all the scenarios you can come up with, it doesn't matter. You can do everything with a slip joint knife other than piercing safely. Now, you can pierce safely with a slip joint knife, but that's an advanced kind of move. Don't try that unless you are an advanced slip joint knife user. But you can cut and slice very, very well on a slip joint knife, no problem at all. And I've done it for years. I grew up on slip joint knives, and they're easy to learn how to safely use. The one big lesson that you must learn is never put pressure on the spine of the blade while you're doing your cutting and slicing. Because if you put pressure on the spine of the blade, then you can start the knife closing. If it gets up to the half stop, I know it's a 2/3 kind of stop really, but it's called a half stop. You can still be safe, but once you get past that, you can be risking it because eventually, especially on a back spring knife, it's different on a detent knife, but especially on a back spring slip joint, eventually, actually I don't want to do it to this one because this one doesn't have a stop pin built in. Eventually when the blade's being pushed in, the spring's going to take over and suck the blade in. It's not that much different than this is a locking folder, this is the rat one. You get to a certain point and it sucks the blade in, except for the fact that's pretty safe. There's just a tiny bit of cutting edge, out there, and it's safe. But on a slip joint knife, there comes a point, and that's pretty much as safe as a detent knife, isn't it? Because it can just stop right there and friction will hold it in place. That's because modern slip joint knives with modern springs back here, they don't have an awful lot of force pulling them closed. Now I'm going to risk this blade because there's no stop pin over here. This is an older knife, older style, older construction. There's the spring, and now I'm pushing against the spring. The spring wants to bring it back to the half stop, but I bring it past the point where it wants to go, and suddenly it slams shut. And that's because this spring is really strong, being an older style of slip joint knife. Here's one from Italy. And this is even worse. This is another reason why I don't like old slip joint knives. We got a blade here, we got a really strong spring back here, and we got this tiny little nail nick, and if you don't get it just right, you break a nail. Now, when I was younger, I broke a lot of nails. And you get it out, and it's still got a lot of force. Look at my hands turning white. My finger and everything, it's turning, I'm pulling with such force to try to get it out. Then I got it to the half stop, and now, it's relatively safe. And I got to pull hard, and then suddenly it's open. And it takes a lot of force to get it to start to close. Now that's a good thing about these old ones, because you can hit it on the back quite hard and nothing's going to happen. And they did that so that it would be more like a locking folder, so it's very safe. You could hit the spine quite hard before it does anything. But I don't like it because when you're going to close the knife, it'll just suddenly take over. There's plenty of room for fingers in that space where your fingers should not be when you're closing the knife, and it'll just suddenly take over. And listen to this. That's quite a bit of force, and if your blade is nice and sharp and your finger's in the way, you're going to the emergency room to get some stitches or maybe a reattached finger. It's just not very smart. Let's talk now about a safe way to open and close these knives. With the detent ones, it's a whole lot safer. So let's talk about the back spring ones because these are more common. Certain companies like Sanrenmu put out a lot of detent, slip joint knives, and Kizer, I've reviewed some from Kizer. I've reviewed them from a lot of different companies, but it is more common to get the back spring ones. So what's the safe way to do it? Let's get these out of the way here so you can focus. Let's try with this knife, and I really like this knife because it's got this extra feature where it's got this pin that you can take out and put in there and lock it closed or lock it open, but that's not what we're talking about. This is the 9165 by Sanrenmu. Now, did you notice what I did when I opened and closed it? There's two ways to hold it. There's basically like this, with your thumb along one side, your index finger on the other side, and then you just open the knife. And when you close it, you do the same thing. This finger here, my middle finger, is underneath. It's supporting. Especially when closing, it's doing a support work there. So I just can't hurt myself this way because my fingers are not in the path of the blade. The other way you can do it is you can hold it like this. Same kind of thing. Now you're using the tips of your fingers to hold it. You can open, you can close, and it's very safe because you've got nothing across here. When the knife is deployed and you're not putting any pressure on the spine, you're only putting pressure on the cutting edge, it's very, very safe. I know some people might not think it's safe, but you're wrong. It's very safe. Now, if you ever end up putting pressure on the spine accidentally, that's what's unsafe. And it's not that the knife is unsafe, it's the user doing something unsafe. So you can't blame the knife, when the fault is with the person. This analogy should be very clear for most people. Are handguns unsafe? Do handguns kill people? No, people with handguns kill people. It's the person doing something with the gun. Same thing with knives. The knife isn't unsafe. And of course, analogies do break down in places, but the knife isn't unsafe. It's the use of the knife that's unsafe. Now, can there be knives that are unsafe? Definitely, there can be. In general, the principle of a slip joint knife, be it either the back spring type or the detent type, they're not inherently unsafe, but they can be used in unsafe ways. So please learn how to be safe. Keep your fingers out of the path. That's the first one. And the second main thing, do not let any pressure come onto the spine of the blade. If you do those two things, you'll be fine. So what do I recommend? Well, my advice is, if you're going to be new to slip joint knives, start off with a detent one. Why is that? Well, this is a detent slip joint knife. This is an older one. I gave it to my dad quite a while ago, and when he passed, I took it back home and cleaned it all up, and now it's in pretty good condition again. He sure did sharpen a recurve into there, though. He used one of those work sharps, the belt-driven system, and just put a lot of pressure on there, but that's a different point. Because of the detent and the way they work, it's a friction folder for 99% of the path. you stop somewhere and the blade just stops there. There's nothing pulling that sharp edge towards, the handle. It just stays where it is until it hits the detent. Now the detent, you hear that click, holds it open, and when you close it, at the very last step, when your fingers are totally out of the way, there's a bit of a detent holding it closed. So get a detent slip joint knife. Down in the comments below and down below in the video description, if you don't know where the video description is, look below the video and in black text it says show more. You click on show more and it opens the video description. In there I've got links, coupons, discount codes, all kinds of good stuff. I will also add several good detent slip joint knives that are good for the first timer, like somebody who's a novice to slip joint knives. If you want to expand your knife hobby, slip joint knives are a good way to go. Slip joint knives they're better accepted in society, and a lot of people live in countries or jurisdictions, states, whatever, where certain knives you just can't have them, but almost everywhere you can have a slip joint knife, because a non-locking knife it's able to be carried almost anywhere. And I like them. I like them a lot. Slip joint knives are awesome. If you want to get a back spring knife and you're on a budget, this is one of my favorites right here. This is the San Remu 7315. They've got some upgraded versions of these. But this thing, there's very little pressure. It comes in at the end right there, but you should have your fingers out of the way by there. Thin, it's light, it's got a two-side pocket clip. You can watch the video of it. It's got a nice blade for slicing and cutting. Sandvik 12C27, so it's not a great steel, but it's a nice knife. And it's just a good thing to carry, a secondary knife or something to have around. Or this San Remu, I really like this. It's also 12C27, but it's big and it's got that cool locking feature with that pin. You just put that pin in there and now it can't close on your finger. And then, my nail's a little too soft right there. Push it, grab it with your nails here because it's got a little bit of a ridge there. And then you put that pin back in storage. I've used this knife like crazy and I've never lost the pin. And because you can either keep it in the storage spot or there, you don't have to leave it loose anywhere. And that's a nice knife. And how many slip joint knives do you know of that have thumb studs? One hand deployment slip joint knife. That's kind of awesome. So, friends, keep your fingers away from the opening in the handle when you're opening or closing the knife, and don't put pressure on the spine, and you'll be fine. Thanks to those who support my channel. I really appreciate it an awful lot. And the rest of you, if you can't afford to support my channel or for whatever reason you don't want to, please support me by subscribing to the channel. Less than 15% of the people who view my videos subscribe, so subscribing really makes a big difference to me. Hit that like or dislike button. Either one, you pick. And share this video with somebody maybe. Hit that share button and share it with somebody. And best, leave a comment. Like from those last ones. After subscribing, the best thing you can do is leave a comment. I read them all. I answer them all. Thank you so much. And remember, friends, always cut towards your chum, not your thumb.